Let me tell you something that took me almost 30 years of medicine to fully understand, and I wish somebody had told me when I was younger. My name is Dr. James Calloway. Most of my patients just call me Dr. J, and I have spent 3 decades sitting across the table from people who came into my office convinced they were perfectly fine. Their heart was fine, their blood pressure was fine, their blood work looked clean. And yet, somewhere deep inside their brain, a quiet fire had already been burning for 10, sometimes 15 years. Here's the part that keeps me up at night, even now. By the time a person forgets their grandchild's name for the first time, the disease is not beginning. It is already old. The damage started long before the first symptom ever whispered its name. So let me hit you with something that sounds impossible but is 100% physiology. Your brain can be losing itself for over a decade while you still feel completely normal. You still cook dinner. You still drive to church. You still tell the same jokes. And the whole time, silently, cell by cell, something is being taken from you, and almost nobody catches it in time. That raises 3 questions I want you to sit with, because everything I tell you today circles back to them. First, why does the earliest sign of dementia have almost nothing to do with forgetting where you put your keys? Second, how is it possible that a common little pill, sitting in the medicine cabinet of nearly every person over 60, may quietly be dragging their memory into the dark? And third, if the brain gives us warning signs 10 years early, why do doctors, myself included in my younger years, keep missing them? I promise you this. By the time this is over, you will know all 6 of the early warning signs, the real ones, not the cartoon version people repeat at family dinners. You will know which one shows up first, and you will know the single habit hiding in plain sight that can accelerate the whole thing. If protecting your mind, and the mind of someone you love, matters to you, stay with me, subscribe, and tap that like button, because what comes next is the part most people never hear until it is too late. Now, let me clear the air about the biggest lie in this whole subject. Most people believe dementia is a memory disease. It is not. Not at the start. Let me say that again because it matters more than anything else you will hear today. Dementia does not begin with memory. It begins somewhere much quieter, much sneakier, and that is exactly why it wins so often. Here is the first warning sign, and I need you to listen to me carefully, because the nuance here is everything. It is not memory loss. It is the loss of recent memory, while old memory stays perfectly intact. There is a world of difference, and that difference is where families get fooled for years. Let me paint it for you the way I have seen it 100 times in my practice. A woman comes in, let us say she is 72. Her daughter is worried, and the daughter says, "Dr. J, my mother's memory is fine. She can tell you every detail of her wedding day back in 1968. She remembers the dress, the song, the name of the priest." And the mother is sitting there smiling, nodding because yes, all of that is true. The wedding, the childhood home, the old phone number from 40 years ago, crystal clear. But then I ask her one simple question. "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" And the room goes quiet. She looks at her daughter. She laughs a little the way people do when they are covering something, and she cannot answer. She genuinely cannot remember what he ate 3 hours ago. Back. That, right there, is the sign. And here is why it happens. Because I want you to understand the biology, not just the story. There is a small structure deep in your brain shaped like a seahorse. It is called the hippocampus. Think of it as the door where every new memory has to pass through before it gets filed away into long-term storage. Old memories, your wedding, your kids being born, the smell of your mother's kitchen, those are already filed. They live in a different part of the brain entirely, and they are safe for a long, long time. But the hippocampus, that door, is almost always the very first place dementia attacks. So the machinery that files today's memories starts breaking down, while the old library upstairs stays fully stocked. This is the cruel trick of it. The family sees the rich, detailed old stories and thinks, her memory is amazing, she is fine. Meanwhile, the door for new memories is rusting shut, one hinge at a time. In my practice, 9 out of 10 families miss this exact thing. They test the wrong memory, they quiz mom on the past, she passes with flying colors, and everybody relaxes. But the past is not the test. The last 24 hours is the test. Ask about this morning. Ask about the conversation you had yesterday. Ask what they watched on television last night. That is where the truth lives. And here is the biological timer ticking underneath all of this. While you are listening to me right now, in a brain that has early trouble, that little seahorse-shaped door is quietly shrinking. On a brain scan, we can actually measure it losing volume, sometimes years before the person or their family notices a single thing. The clock does not wait for symptoms. It never did. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Dr. J, but everybody forgets things. I forget why I walked into a room. My husband forgets where he parked. Does that mean we have dementia? And this is the loophole I need to close for you, because this is where people either panic for no reason or dismiss a real warning by accident. Listen to me closely. Normal forgetting and dangerous forgetting are two completely different animals. When a healthy 65-year-old forgets a name, it comes back later. It surfaces an hour after, in the shower, out of nowhere. Oh, Robert. His name was Robert. The information was stored correctly. It was just a slow retrieval. That is your brain being a little older, not a little sick. But in early dementia, the memory was never stored in the first place. It is not late retrieval. It is a blank tape. There is nothing to retrieve because nothing was ever recorded. So the person does not say the name an hour later. They do not remember the event happened at all. Tell them you already talked about it, and they will insist you never did. Because for them, truthfully, that conversation left no trace. That is the difference between a filing cabinet that is slow to open and a filing cabinet that was never filled. One is aging. The other is a warning. And this is the trap so many loving families fall into. They say, well, I forget things too, so this must be normal. No. The question is not whether they forget. The question is whether the memory ever existed at all. Repeated questions are the giveaway. When someone asks you the same question 3 times in one afternoon, not because they did not hear you, but because each time is genuinely the first time for them, pay attention. That is not stubbornness. That is the door failing. I remember a gentleman, a retired engineer, sharp as a tack his whole life. His wife brought him in almost apologizing, saying she felt silly for worrying. During our conversation, he asked me the same question about his blood pressure medication 4 separate times in 20 minutes. And each time he asked it fresh, with the same curiosity, as if he had never asked before. His wife caught my eye across the room, and I saw the exact moment she understood. That repetition told me more than any single test could. The recent memory door was already closing. So if you take nothing else from this first part, take this. Stop testing the past. Start watching the present. And here is where it gets more unsettling. Because the second warning sign is one that people hide better than almost any other, and it has nothing to do with memory at all. You would think losing your words is obvious, right? That if someone started struggling to speak, everyone would notice immediately. But that is exactly the ambush. Because the human brain is a master at covering its own tracks. And the second sign, trouble finding words, comes with a built-in disguise so clever that even the person experiencing it does not realize what is happening. Here is how it shows up. Not as full sentences falling apart, not as slurred speech. It starts with one small thing, the specific word going missing and getting replaced by a vague one. Instead of, hand me the remote control, it becomes hand me the thing, the clicker thing. Instead of wristwatch, it is the thing you wear. Instead of refrigerator, it is the cold box in the kitchen. The person still communicates. They still get the point across, and so nobody sounds an alarm. Let me tell you the physiology, because this is where the nuance lives. There is a region in your brain, on the left side for most people, that acts like a search engine for words. You want to name something, you fire a request, and this region pulls up the exact word in a fraction of a second. In early dementia, that search engine starts slowing down and losing its index. The concept is still there. The person knows exactly what a refrigerator does. They can describe it perfectly. They simply cannot retrieve the label. The idea is intact. The name is gone. And here is the ambush, the reason this hides for years. The brain is brilliant at compensating. It reaches for the nearest available word. It talks around the missing one. We doctors call this circumlocution, talking in circles around the word you cannot find. And to a family member across the dinner table, it just sounds like Grandpa being a little wordy, a little roundabout. Nobody thinks the word retrieval system in his brain is failing. They think, he always did like to ramble. Back, hidden in plain sight. I had a colleague, another physician, who told me about his own father, a lawyer, a man who built his entire career on precise language, on choosing exactly the right word in a courtroom. And the first sign, the very first, was that this master of words started saying that legal thing instead of contract. A man who had lived and breathed vocabulary for 50 years, suddenly reaching for the fog. My colleague, a trained doctor, missed it for over a year because his father covered so smoothly. If a physician can miss it in his own father, understand how easily any of us can miss it. Now here is the false comfort I have to take away from you, gently. You might think, well, my mother has always been chatty and vague. That is just her personality. And maybe it is. But there is a way to tell the difference, and it is the same principle as before. The question is whether it is new and whether it is getting worse. A lifelong scatterbrained talker is not the concern. The concern is the precise, articulate person who suddenly starts groping for words they owned their whole life. Change from the baseline. That is the signal, not the personality. The change. We have covered the first two of the 6, memory and words. In the next part, we will dive into the most dangerous sign of all, the loss of judgment. Stay tuned. So let us walk straight into the third sign, because this is the one that changes everything. This is the moment the whole story stops being about a fading memory and becomes about safety. The third warning sign is the loss of judgment and orientation, and it is the one families are the most ashamed to talk about, which is exactly why it does so much damage in silence. Here is what I mean by judgment in plain terms. It is the invisible manager inside your head that runs the numbers before you act. Should I trust this person on the phone? Is it safe to cross the street right now? Is $50 a fair price or a robbery? Do I turn left or right to get home from the store I have driven to for 30 years? All of that runs in the front of your brain, behind your forehead, in a region called the frontal lobe. And when dementia moves into that territory, the manager starts making decisions that would have horrified the person just a few years earlier. Let me tell you how this looks in real life, because it almost never looks the way people expect. It does not look like confusion in a hospital gown. It looks like a proud, capable person quietly making one strange choice after another. A woman who balanced the family checkbook for 40 years suddenly cannot figure out the tip at a restaurant. And I do not mean she is a little slow with it. I mean she stares at the bill like it is written in a foreign language. A man who never fell for anything in his life hands over $2,000 to a stranger on the telephone who claims his grandson is in jail. And here is the part that breaks my heart in my practice. Afterward, they cannot even explain why they did it. The manager was simply not on duty. Listen to me closely, because this is the nuance that saves lives. The first place this shows up for most people is money and direction. Money because handling numbers requires that front-of-the-brain manager to weigh, compare, and judge in real time. And direction because finding your way home is not memory, it is spatial judgment. Constantly calculating where you are against where you need to be. When either of those start slipping, that is not a small thing. That is the frontal lobe raising its hand. And now here comes the biological timer I promised you would keep hearing about. Getting lost while driving a familiar route is one of the loudest early alarms there is, and it is one of the most dangerous. In my practice, I have had to have the hardest conversation a doctor can have, telling a family that their loved one can no longer safely drive. And do you know what almost every one of those families said first? But Dr. J, he has driven that road for 40 years. That is exactly the point. It was never about the road. It was about the manager who reads the road. When someone gets turned around on a street they have known since before you were born, the fire is no longer quiet. It has reached the front of the house. Now I have to close a loophole here, because I do not want you panicking over the wrong thing. Everybody makes a bad money decision once in a while. Everybody takes a wrong turn now and then, especially somewhere new. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about a pattern, a change, in a person who used to be sharp in exactly these areas. The lifelong penny pincher who suddenly gives money away. The navigator of the family who suddenly cannot find the grocery store. It is the contrast, the before and after, that tells the truth. Not one mistake. The direction of travel. And here is the ugly domino that connects this to everything before it. The recent memory door was already closing. The words were already slipping. And now, on top of that, the judgment manager goes offline. Do you see the trap? The person cannot store new information, cannot always find the right words, and cannot reliably judge a situation. But they still look like themselves. They still dress the same, smile the same, sit in the same chair. So the family keeps giving them the benefit of the doubt, right up until money disappears or someone gets lost after dark. This is the sign that turns a private family worry into a genuine emergency. Here is something the family almost never expects, and I want to say it plainly because you will not hear it discussed in most kitchens. Very often, the person losing their judgment does not know they are losing it. In fact, they defend it. When you gently point out the mistake, they push back. Sometimes angrily. I know what I am doing. Stop treating me like a child. And it is easy to take that as stubbornness. But it is not stubbornness. It is a real feature of the disease. The same damaged part of the brain that runs judgment is also the part that is supposed to notice something is wrong. When that goes, the person genuinely cannot see their own decline. Their internal alarm is broken. And once you understand that, you stop arguing with them and you start protecting them, which is a completely different thing. I remember a retired school teacher, a woman who had commanded a classroom for 35 years. Her son told me she had started sending checks to every charity that mailed her a letter, hundreds of them, over and over. And when he tried to talk to her about it, she was insulted, deeply. I have managed my own money my entire life. And she believed it, completely. The manager in her frontal lobe had gone quiet, but the pride was still fully alive. So now we have three. Recent memory, words, judgment. But the fourth sign is the one that catches everyone off guard, because it is not a thinking problem at all. It is a feeling problem. The fourth warning sign is a change in mood and personality. And above all, apathy. Not sadness. Apathy. I need you to understand the difference because it is enormous. Here is the trap, and it is a cruel one. When an older person stops doing the things they love, stops calling friends, stops gardening, stops going to church, what does everyone assume? Depression. And so they treat the depression, sometimes for years, and meanwhile the real cause is sitting quietly in the frontal lobe, untouched. Depression usually comes with sadness. The person feels bad, they express pain. Apathy in early dementia is different. There is no sadness. There is simply nothing. The engine that generates wanting has gone quiet. The person is not unhappy about sitting in the chair all day. They are not tormented. They just do not feel the pull to get up and do anything at all. Ask them if they are sad, and they will honestly say no. The motivation itself has been switched off. A family sees dad sitting quietly, not complaining, and they think, well, at least he seems peaceful. Listen to me carefully. That quiet peace can be the disease itself. The absence of complaint is not always a good sign. There is another face to the fourth sign, and it is the opposite of apathy, personality change. The gentle, patient grandfather who becomes suddenly irritable, suspicious, even cruel with words. The private, dignified woman who starts saying blunt, inappropriate things she never would have dreamed of saying before. Families take this so personally. They think, he has turned mean. But hear me, this is not the person choosing to change. This is the frontal lobe, the same manager we talked about, losing its grip on the filters that hold personality steady. The brake pads on behavior are wearing thin. What comes out is not the person's true heart. It is the disease speaking through them. In my practice, I have seen this misread more than almost anything else. Adult children who spent 2 years angry at a parent. Do not judge the change as a moral failing. Judge it as information. A sudden shift in temperament is the brain announcing itself. And now watch how the dominoes keep falling, because this is where it gets frightening. The recent memory is going. The words are slipping. The judgment is failing. And now the personality and the motivation are shifting too. 4 signs, and every single one of them wears a disguise the family is eager to believe. Good long-term memory. Just chatty. A little stubborn. Probably just depressed or tired. 4 alarms. 4 convenient excuses. So here is where I have to warn you about what is coming, because the 5th sign is the strangest of them all, and it is one that can appear years before everything we have discussed so far. It hides in your nose and in your sleep. So let me take you somewhere unexpected now, because the 5th warning sign does not live in your memory or your words. It lives in your nose. The nerves that carry smell run from the inside of your nose directly up into the brain, into some of the very first regions that certain kinds of dementia attack. The smell processing area sits right next door to that seahorse-shaped memory door we talked about. They are neighbors. Let me tell you how this shows up, because it is so quiet. Food starts tasting flat. The person begins over-salting everything because they cannot taste it the way they used to. And taste, remember, is mostly smell. They stop noticing the smell of coffee in the morning. They cannot smell smoke or spoiled milk. And here is the dangerous part in my practice. I have seen elderly patients who could no longer smell a gas leak. Think about that. Now here is the biological timer, and it is a haunting one. Researchers have found that in some forms of this illness, the loss of smell can begin many years before the first memory symptom. Many years. So while a person is still driving, still working, this early domino may have already fallen quietly in the background. It is one of the reasons I now ask my patients over 60, can you still smell your coffee in the morning? But smell is only half of the 5th sign. The other half hides in sleep, specifically in a very particular kind of sleep disturbance. I am talking about something called acting out your dreams. The person begins to physically move during sleep, kicking, punching, shouting, sometimes even leaping out of bed, living out a vivid dream as if it were real. Their sleeping partner is often the first to know, usually because they have been accidentally struck in the middle of the night. Normally, when you dream, your body is paralyzed on purpose. Your brain switches off your muscles. It is a safety feature, wired deep into the brainstem. But in this particular sleep disorder, that safety switch fails. And the failure of that switch has been linked to a significantly higher chance of developing certain kinds of dementia and movement disorders down the road. A man violently acting out his dreams at 60 may be showing one of the earliest signs. Now I have to close the loophole because I do not want you lying awake tonight terrified over one bad night. Everyone has an occasional restless sleep. Everyone loses their sense of smell temporarily with a cold. That is not what we are talking about. We're talking about a persistent loss of smell that does not come back, and a repeated pattern of acting out dreams night after night. It is the persistence and the pattern, not the single event. As always, the question is whether it is new and whether it stays. And do you see the domino here? This 5th sign can arrive first, before the memory. It means the body may have been signaling for years while everyone was watching the wrong things. The family was waiting for forgetfulness, the obvious sign. So now we have 5. Recent memory, words, judgment, mood and apathy, smell and sleep. But there is one more, and in many ways it is the one that finally makes the whole thing undeniable. The 6th sign is the loss of executive function. Let me tell you what that phrase actually means. In plain terms, it is your brain's ability to plan, to sequence, to carry out a task that has multiple steps in the right order. Executive function is the conductor that keeps the whole orchestra in time. Think about everything that requires this. Cooking a meal, paying the monthly bills, taking medications correctly, planning a trip, even getting dressed in the proper order. None of these are single actions. They are chains of small steps. Here is how it shows up. A woman who cooked Sunday dinner for 50 years suddenly cannot manage it. Not because she forgot the recipe, but because she cannot hold the steps in order anymore. She puts the pot on, but forgets to turn on the stove. She starts one dish, wanders off, starts another, and leaves the first burning. The knowledge is still there. The sequencing is gone. The conductor has put down the baton. I remember a patient, a proud man who had run his own small business for decades, who had managed employees and taxes for 30 years without a single mistake. His daughter brought him in because she had found 6 months of unpaid bills stuffed in a drawer. This was a man who could balance a company's books in his sleep. And now he could not sequence the simple, repeating steps of paying a single utility bill. When I saw that, I knew. The executive conductor was failing. And here is the biological timer of the 6th sign, and it carries a real edge of danger. Executive dysfunction is often the point where safety at home becomes a genuine risk. The stove left on. The wrong dose of medication. The bath left running. This is the stage where the decline starts to threaten the person's physical safety. In my practice, this is very often the sign that finally moves a family from "we are worried" to "we have to do something now." Now let me close the loophole one last time. Making a mistake with a recipe, forgetting a bill once, mixing up a step when you are tired, that happens to all of us. That is not the sign. The sign is the loss of the ability to sequence familiar tasks. It is not the occasional error, it is the collapse of a skill that used to be automatic. Again, and I will keep saying it, it is the change from the person's own baseline that tells the truth. And now step back with me and look at the full domino chain, because when you see all 6 together, the whole cruel design becomes clear. First, the recent memory door begins to close. Then the words start slipping. Then, judgment fails. Then mood and motivation shift. All the while, the smell and the sleep may have been sounding the alarm for years. And finally, executive function collapses. And only then does the family finally see what was there the whole time. 6 signs, 6 disguises, and a clock that never stopped ticking through any of it. But here is where I have to stop and tell you the thing I have been building toward this entire time. Because there is one more piece to this story, and it may be the most important of all. What if I told you that a small, ordinary pill, one sitting right now in the medicine cabinet of millions of people over 60, sold without a prescription, taken for something as innocent as sleep or allergies, has been directly linked to memory decline and a higher risk of dementia? Not a rare drug, a common one you may have taken last night. That is where we are going next, and once you know its name, you will never look at your medicine shelf the same way again. Stay with me. So let me tell you about the pill. And I want to be very careful and very honest with you here, because this is exactly the kind of subject where people exaggerate, and I refuse to do that to you. I am not going to tell you that one pill gives you dementia. That would be a lie. What I'm going to tell you is what the research actually shows, and what it shows is unsettling enough on its own. There is an entire class of medications called anticholinergics. That is a big word, so let me make it simple. These are drugs that block a chemical messenger in your brain called acetylcholine. And here is why that matters. Acetylcholine is one of the single most important chemicals for memory and learning. It is, in many ways, the fuel that the memory system runs on. In fact, some of the very medications we use to treat dementia work by trying to raise acetylcholine levels. So now think about what it means to take something night after night that does the opposite, that lowers it. Now here is the part that stops people cold in my office. You may already be taking one of these drugs and have no idea, because anticholinergics are not hiding in some exotic prescription. They are sitting in ordinary medicine cabinets. Many common over-the-counter sleep aids are anticholinergic. Many older allergy medications, the ones that make you drowsy, are anticholinergic. Certain pills for an overactive bladder, certain older medications for depression, certain remedies for motion sickness and stomach cramps. That little pill that so many people over 60 reach for every single night just to fall asleep? For a great many of them, it belongs to this exact class. And here is what the long-term research found, and I'm giving you this straight. Large studies that followed thousands of older adults over many years found that people with the highest use had a measurably higher risk of developing dementia. Let me say clearly what this does and does not mean. It does not mean one dose is dangerous. It means that heavy, long-term, year-after-year use of these drugs, especially in people over 65, is associated with a real, increased risk. Now connect this back to everything I told you. Remember the first sign, the recent memory door, the seahorse, the hippocampus, running on acetylcholine. Now imagine taking something every single night that dulls that very chemical. You may not be causing the disease, but you may be pouring water on the one system you most need to protect. You may be accelerating a decline that was already whispering in the background. That is the danger. A slow, quiet erosion. And here is the biological timer, the same one that has been ticking. Somebody over 60 takes that sleep pill tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night for 5 years. And the whole time, the memory system is being asked to run on less fuel. That is why I now go through every one of my older patients' medicines, because so often the danger is not the drug they were warned about. It is the harmless-looking one nobody ever mentioned. But please, and I mean this with everything I have, do not do anything rash with this information. Do not walk to your cabinet tonight and throw everything away. Some of these medications are genuinely important. This is not a reason to panic. It is a reason to have a conversation. Take your bottles, all of them, to your doctor or your pharmacist and ask one simple question. Are any of these anticholinergic, and is there a safer choice for someone my age? Very often the answer is yes, there is a safer alternative, and no one had ever thought to look. That single conversation may be one of the most protective things you ever do for your own mind. Now let me pull this all together, because I promised you at the very beginning that this would matter. And here is why it does. Remember where we started. I told you that the brain can be losing itself for 10, even 15 years. Well, now you understand why that is not a reason for despair. It is the greatest gift hidden inside this whole subject. Because if the disease begins 10 or 15 years before the obvious symptoms, then that means there is a window, a long, quiet window of time where the signs are whispering, in the recent memory, in the slipping words, in the failing judgment, in the flattened mood, in the fading smell, and where the choices you make actually still matter. That is why I did not want you to test the past. I wanted you to watch the present. Not the wedding from 1968, but the breakfast from this morning. Not whether they tell the old stories, but whether they can hold on to the new day. Because the people who catch this early are almost never the ones waiting for the dramatic movie version moment of forgetting a grandchild's name. They are the ones who notice the small, quiet, disguised things and refuse to explain them away. So let me ask you to do 3 things, and then I will let you go. First, think honestly about someone you love who is over 60 and go back through these 6 signs, not with fear, but with attention. The recent memory, the words, the judgment, the mood and the apathy, the smell and the sleep, the daily routines. Second, take the medicine cabinet seriously. Have that one conversation about anticholinergics with a doctor or pharmacist. It costs you nothing. And third, do not let the disguise win. When you hear, she just has a good memory for the old days, or he always liked to ramble, or she is just being stubborn, pause. Ask whether the excuse is covering a signal. If this helped you see something more clearly, then do me one favor. Share it with the person in your life who needs to hear it. Subscribe so I can keep bringing you the things most people find out too late. Because here is the truth I have carried through 30 years of this work. Dementia does its greatest damage in silence, behind the excuses everyone is happy to believe. And silence only wins when we let it. The moment you start paying attention to the quiet signs, you take away its greatest weapon. You cannot always stop what is coming, but you can meet it early with your eyes open instead of late with regret. I have sat on the wrong side of that too many times, with families who said, "Dr. J, looking back, it was so obvious." It is only obvious looking back. My hope, my whole reason for telling you all of this, is that you will not have to look back, that you will look now, and take care of that magnificent, mysterious, irreplaceable brain of yours. It has carried you through your whole life. The least we can do is learn to listen when it starts to whisper. I am Dr. J. Thank you for staying with me, and I will see you in the next one.